Hey guys, one of the most common questions I get when people first learn that I'm a top-ranked competitive Scrabble player is what's the most important thing I can do to improve my own Scrabble game? And my answer is always the same thing. Learn the two-letter words. You might be thinking, why the two-letter words? After all, if I want to quickly raise my Scrabble scores, shouldn't I learn 7 and 8-letter words so I can get better at playing all of my letters at once for a bingo and getting a 50-point bonus? Actually, not so fast, for a couple of reasons. Number one, speaking of bingos, it's often going to happen that when you manage to find a bingo on your rack, you're not going to actually be able to play it unless you do so making one or more obscure two-letter words simultaneously. So knowing the two-letter words is going to greatly increase your ability to actually play bingos that you find. And remember, if you have a bingo but can't play it, that's just as good as having no bingo at all. Aside from bingos, two-letter words are instrumental for making so-called overlap plays. Instead of simply playing through a tile on the board, you're often going to get a lot more points and just have a lot more options if you're able to play either to the left or right or above or below a play already on the board. And doing so is very difficult, if not impossible, without a good grasp of the two-letter words. It's worth mentioning that these kind of plays can be especially lucrative when you have a high point tile such as the X. For instance, if you know that XI and XU are valid two-letter words, and there's a triple letter score available, you might be able to place the X both ways on that square, getting over 50 points for simply making a 2x2 square of words. These kind of plays are super satisfying to make, and I might also add really irritating to your opponent. So the more you can make these kind of plays, the better you're going to become at Scrabble. And you're not going to be able to do that without knowing the two-letter words. Now, once I convince someone that it is indeed useful to learn the two-letter words, the next question I invariably get is how much time is that going to take and how should I do it? The good news is there aren't that many two-letter words, just over 100, specifically 107 in the North American Tournament Dictionary, a little more than that, but not that much more if you're using the International Collins Dictionary. And as for how to learn the two-letter words, that's what I'm going to go over in today's video. There are a lot of ways you can learn the two-letter words, and some of them are a lot better than others, and there is one that I have found is super effective and efficient, and that's what I'll be talking about in today's video. But just to illustrate why that way is better, I want to first talk about some ways of learning the two-letter words that don't work very well. The first way that you should not learn your two-letter words is by anagramming them, such as in the quiz on the program Zuzava I'm showing you guys on your screen. Now, anagramming is awesome for longer words like bingos, when being able to see the letters on your rack and unscramble them into a longer word is of paramount importance. But two-letter words aren't really about anagramming. After all, it's more about knowing whether they're valid or not so that you can both make those overlap plays I was talking about in the intro and call your opponent out if they make an invalid two-letter word. So for instance, with this question here, it's showing me the letters O and P, and it's telling me in the bottom left that there are two answers. Well, that doesn't leave very much wiggle room. After all, with two letters, there are only two ways to arrange them to make a word. So that means I immediately just know that op and po both have to be two-letter words, which indeed this confirms when I check the answers. And this is just not useful, because this is not any better than simply reading a whole list of two-letter words. The anagramming process here doesn't help me actually ingrain the words, since the letters more or less anagram themselves, there's no actual work to be done. So because of that, guys, you're going to get a lot of confirmation bias, and you're just not going to develop that instinct for whether something is a word or isn't a word. You're not going to get any feedback telling you when you think something is a word and it isn't, or when you don't think something is a word and it is. So this is method number one that I do not recommend for learning your two-letter words. The second method I don't want you guys using for learning the two-letter words is printing out a list of the twos, such as the one on the popular cheat sheet I have pulled up on my screen here, and either reading it over and over or simply staring at it for hours on end until you feel like you have ingrained the two-letter words. The problem with this method is the same problem as the anagramming method I just talked about. Namely, you're not getting any positive or negative feedback for either things you think are words and aren't words, or things that you don't think are words and are words. After all, if you do this, then the next day you might be thinking, oh shoot, was PO actually on that list or not? I don't remember. Unless you happen to have a photographic memory and can literally pull up this exact picture in your mind, it's going to be very easy for these words to quickly slip out of your mind and for you to lose confidence if you use this method. So I highly don't recommend it. The third and final bad method for learning the two-letter words that I sometimes see that I want to talk about today is trying to pick them up via osmosis by either looking at a ton of annotated games, such as those on the site crosstables.com I have pulled up here, or by simply playing a ton of games yourself, figuring, These are two-letter words. They come up often enough. Sooner or later, with a large enough sample size, I'll have come across all of them. And in theory, over a long enough period, this method should work. The problem is it's super erratic and inefficient because yes, while all two-letter words do come up relatively often, some of them do come up more often than others. So just based on the random sample of games you play or games you look at, you might end up seeing some words a lot more frequently than others and some words more quickly than others. It's also not dispositive. It's possible that you play and look at 1,000 games and it just so happens that one two-letter word doesn't come up. And you will never have looked at a full list of the two-letter words in any format. So you cannot know for sure using this method at any given point that you've encountered all of the two-letter words. It's possible if you use this method that at some point you'll be playing a game and your opponent plays a two-letter word that you happen to have not seen in the sample of games you previously looked at to try to osmose all the two-letter words. And you think, okay, well, I haven't seen this as a two-letter word, and I figure I probably would have by now, so I'm going to challenge. And it comes back valid and you lose a turn. So we definitely don't want that to happen. So please save yourself the hassle and the uncertainty and do not use this method of osmosis for learning the two-letter words. Alrighty guys, now that we have an understanding of several methods for learning the two-letter words that don't work and each of their shortcomings, let's talk about the method that actually does work. And for that, we're going to go back to Ziziva quizzes. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Mac, didn't we just talk about bad method number 1 being a Ziziva anagrams quiz? Well, yes, but we're going to be using a very different format for the quiz that I'm about to show you. Just like for an anagrams quiz, you're going to click this blue question mark icon on Ziziva to create a new quiz. But the key is, instead of the default quiz type, which is anagrams as you can see here, you're going to select word list recall from the dropdown. Just like for an anagram quiz, you're going to filter out all the two-letter words by leaving anagram match and adding 2 question marks and clicking OK. And now, instead of it displaying 2 tiles on top that I have to anagram like it did before, it just leaves me this completely blank slate. And on the bottom left, you can see it tells me that there are 107 words I have to enter. So basically, what this is forcing me to do, guys, is recall all the two-letter words from memory and enter them here one by one. Now, that probably sounds super daunting at first, but what you want to do is take it alphabetically. That's going to make this a lot easier. So you start with the first letter being A, and then you go alphabetically through the second letter. So you start with AA, and AA is actually a word. So I'm going to type in AA and hit enter. Then I move on to AB. AB is a word. I'm going to do that. How about AC? It stands for air conditioning, but it's not valid in Scrabble, so I'm going to skip that one. And now AD is a word, so I'm going to enter that. And then AE, AF, is that a word? It is not a word, although it is a fairly common phony two-letter word I see. And what's great about this method, guys, as I think you can already see, is it forces me to go through the process of thinking, is AF actually a word? Whereas with the anagrams or just reading, I don't get that same feedback. And let's say I go through it and I think AF is a word. If I type that in and I hit enter, it's going to give me this red incorrect mark over here. And when I come back at the end of the quiz and hit this Analyze Quiz button on the right, you can see all of the incorrect words I typed in, so I'll be able to review that and learn from it. That's how I'm going to get this positive feedback if I enter something that's not a word. So then I keep going, okay, AF isn't a word, AG, that's a word, AH, that's a word, and so on. I'm not going to bore you guys and go through all of the two-letter words here, but basically as soon as I exhaust all the things I think are words starting with an A, then I move on to the B. I'm going to go BA. The B is a little easier because obviously the second letter, unless it's a Y, can't be a consonant. So it's going to be BA, BE, BI, and so forth. And you go on with each letter until you get to ZA, and that's going to be it. It takes a little time the first time you do this, but it's really not as bad as it sounds if you follow this alphabetical process. What I want you guys doing is once you're all done, once you've come up with all the two-letter words you think are valid, then you're going to just hit the Enter key on your keyboard, and in blue, now it's going to show you all the ones that you didn't come up with that are actually valid. Obviously, there's a lot here because I didn't finish the quiz. So what you're going to do is look through all these blue ones carefully, go back to the Analyze Quiz and look at all of the red ones carefully, and try to understand which of the words that you thought were words aren't words, which are the words that you didn't think are words. And then you're going to do this whole thing over again, start a new quiz, leave the same exact parameters, and here we go. And I want you guys basically doing this same thing over and over until you're getting all 107 words and not making any errors. It's not going to take you as many repetitions as you think. And once again, guys, what's so good about this method is you're going to have that feedback whenever you enter something that isn't a word or whenever you miss something that is a word. And that's going to make it a lot easier than any of the other methods to know going forward what is a valid two-letter word and, just as importantly, what is not. So I hope this is useful. For anybody just learning their two-letter words, if you try this method, please let me know in the comments what you think. I think it's going to be very useful based on my experience with my students, so let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching. Hope this video was useful, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.